Hey, I see a lot of people still coming into the Zoom room, but I think we're going to get started anyway. Welcome everyone to our latest webinar in our Capital Insights series. Thank you so much for joining us today. We designed these webinars to provide information and to have a discussion on topics related to funding your innovation startup in order to help entrepreneurs as they scale their business. Today's session focuses on identifying funding partners, specifically family offices and foundations. I'm Petra Stegman, VP of Educational Programs at Connect. Connect is a nonprofit organization created 40 years ago. Since then, we continue to work with life science and high-tech entrepreneurs to help them grow and scale their companies through the various programs we offer. We're very excited to have you with us. We have a stellar panel lined up today, so let's get started. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Sarah Hibbard. Sarah is an experienced corporate attorney and currently serves as counsel at Snell and Wilmer, where she advises life sciences and digital health companies on corporate governance, financings, M&A, and various commercial agreements. She's passionate about supporting startups to create a strong legal foundation and position themselves for growth on the path to commercialization success. Prior to joining Snell and Wilmer, she was general counsel to a company in the oncology space. Sarah received her JD from Thomas Jefferson School of Law and her BS from San Diego State University. Welcome, Sarah.
Thanks, Petra. Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be here today and glad to be here with this great panel that we have for everyone today. So without further ado, I would like to ask each of our panelists, starting with Carter Cliff, to introduce themselves, a 1 or 2 minute quick introduction so we can get to know everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Petra and Sarah. My name is Carter Cliff. I've been working in the cell and gene therapy industry for 10 to 15 years. I'm currently CEO of a company called Papillon Therapeutics, which is a spin out of UCSD based on the scientific findings of Dr. Stephanie Shirky. And so I've been working to raise capital for the company and advance its lead program into an IND filing.
Awesome. Thanks, Cliff. And next up, Tina Saw.
Hi, my name is Dr. Tina Saw. I'm the CEO and founder of Oral Genome. We're a point-of-care dental saliva test. And what we do is we measure different biomarkers related to your oral health diseases and connect them with the systemic health. We do this all through a smartphone. I've been doing this since 2021 is when the company had founded. And so here we are, we've been raising capital, have raised quite a bit of capital, and now we're on the market in 2025.
Awesome. Thank you, Tina. And Courtney Young.
Hi, everyone. I'm Courtney Young, one of the co-founders and the CEO of Myogene Bio, a biotech startup that's really interested in developing cutting-edge therapies for muscle diseases. Our lead program is a gene editing therapy for a muscle wasting disease called Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And we spun out of UCLA in 2019, have raised over $7 million in funding, primarily from grants, venture philanthropy, and angels, and are really inspired to develop truly meaningful therapies for muscle diseases, and have been inspired by patients like my cousin who actually has Duchenne.
Great. Thank you, Courtney. Well, actually, let's start with you. So first question, I know that early in your fundraising journey, you received a research grant from the Muscular Dystrophy Association. Can you share with us how you connected with them and what the whole process was like?
Yeah, so the Muscular Dystrophy Association, or MDA, is a known supporter of muscular dystrophy research. We had actually known MDA from our prior academic research in the field. My co-founder, Dr. Melissa Spencer, has been heavily involved in MDA for about 30 years. And so when we were looking to launch Myogene, we were very interested in targeting some of the groups that have known expertise and interest in muscular dystrophy. And so we applied for a research grant from MDA, which was a small funding project, but was allowing us to get started in the company. They also have done some venture philanthropy type investments through their MVP program. We also got a small one of those. And yeah, the reason we were really interested in targeting groups like MDA is because we were working on a disease that immediately fit in their thesis, and they were able to appreciate the value of that. And we treated it more like an academic grant, but from the perspective of a company, hoping for them to see the impact that companies can make to really advance therapies to patients, which is what their main focus is in funding research.
That's great. So a quick follow-up on that also, are you still working with them? Have they provided additional support, and has it been kind of a long-term relationship with them?
Yeah, so we've had two funding rounds with MDA. Currently, they no longer allow companies to apply for their research grants, unfortunately. So you have to do the venture philanthropy approach with them. But we definitely still maintain that relationship. MDA hosts conferences that we attend. We network with them continually in the field, and they are supportive of just the general field of research. So even if it's outside of funding, we have other questions, we can still go to MDA with those questions. So we definitely like to maintain that relationship with groups like them.
Yeah, that's great. It sounds like they've been a great partner for you guys.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Tina, I have a similar question for you. So I know that you received funding from the American Dental Association. How did that come to fruition? And was this an equity investment, a grant? Can you talk to us a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah, sure. So my background is actually as a dentist, and I kind of knew the problems that our association was trying to solve and things, which is really building better care, building better, I would say, like tools for diagnosis, really helping patients get really engaged in their dental health. And so what I did was actually went bravely to the ADA and I said, hey, I've got this idea. I've been working on this company for a while. I know you guys typically haven't done investments, but I really believe this technology can really change patient care and change provider care. And so that's, it was just a bold ask, and the worst they could say was no, and they said yes. And so really, I feel they've been such a great partner in the company, and it's been wonderful.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Just a quick question for you on that one. Have they done any other investments like this, or was this kind of a first for them as well?
We definitely are their first investment. They did do another investment in the dental space also.
Oh, awesome. That's really cool. That's really cool to kind of be the first jump into this area for them. So congrats on that. So let's shift over to family offices. And Carter, I'm hoping that you can help us with this one. You've worked with family offices. How did you find these family offices? And then how did you manage to get in front of them? How did you know which ones were a good fit? And kind of what were you looking at when you talked with these family offices?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I think of the family offices that we've interfaced with as impact investors. And so they're high net worth individuals that have an office or a formal family office. And generally they have a connection to the target disease condition. That's the inroad, and you may make that connection, for example, through the disease foundation. And so it's really nice to have them on the cap table at a seed stage, because they know better than anybody, in some ways, the disease pathology, the realities of the patient experience, and they're willing to put their capital towards a solution for that. So that's really where I've been encountering different offices of high net worth individuals, or family offices, or nonprofits that are kind of all in impact investing.
Awesome. And then kind of a follow on with that, with your experience, how do family offices invest? Are they, do they have the same thesis and end goals like a typical VC firm does, or is that a bit different for them?
No, they're not necessarily set up to do the level of diligence and deal flow screening that a formal venture fund would have, although networks like New Fund and others, angel networks do that on behalf of their members. And so I think, it's not as much of a deep dive as it would be with a venture firm. but it's very, very helpful because the the family office, high net worth, the impact investment community does diligence, and they want to make sure that they're investing in a program that could impact the patient population they care about. And so there's a lot of things that they want to know during their diligence that help you get ready for future discussions with pharma or venture when the time is right for that. So I think it's fair to say that relative to their check size, they have a pretty intense diligence process and they look into things. But they're not always writing checks as large as the venture funds, and so the diligence there is more involved.
Got it. So kind of a segue from what Carter was just talking about on the diligence with family offices. Tina, how did you find the diligence process with the American Dental Association?
I found the diligence process, I mean, they're definitely not a venture. They were set up as a venture fund. I feel like, I've gone through some pretty heavy diligence with other places. For them, it was more of like, is this a need in the dental world? And, what are your contracts? Like, where is it set to go? Like, it's just the regular financial projections we had. But I would say I found that their diligence was more like, can we strategically partner with her versus, I would say, as much as the diligence on VC side, which is the financials and a lot more beyond that.
Yeah, I think that's really good insight because when you're looking at kind of these different types of financings, it's important to kind of understand what they're looking for in the diligence process, and it might not be kind of what you're expecting from maybe a VC firm or what you would expect from a VC firm. So thank you. So I think this next one is kind of for all three of you, and maybe we can start with Courtney first. When it came to fundraising, I know that all three of you started out by going after funding that was not initially, typical venture capital funding. Can each of you talk about your respective fundraising strategy and why it made sense to take this kind of approach?
Yeah, so I think for us, it made a lot of sense because we were really focused on developing a meaningful therapy for a type of muscle disease. And Duchenne has a really active patient community with multiple foundations, a lot of groups trying to promote research in the space. And so by going to some of the foundations, getting grants and looking at venture philanthropy, these groups could really see the value proposition of our work because we were trying to, develop a really meaningful therapy for this disease that the foundation really cares about. And so in a way, you could kind of convince these groups of the worth of your approach because they had connections to the disease. It also is really good validation because these foundations are really experts in the disease that you're going after. And so getting funding from them is high validation for other groups that are not as expert in the field. We were also very interested in targeting non-dilutive grants. We were spinning out of academia where we had a lot of experience writing grants, and having non-dilutive funding obviously has a lot of benefits and has some challenges, but a lot of benefits for maintaining kind of your cap table. And so we really pursued grants, venture philanthropy, and other foundations as a way to have our initial funding both for the disease specificity and validation, as an easier way to get data so we'd be further along when we would talk to VCs, and for leveraging the non-dilutive funding approach.
Great. And then Carter, do you want to talk to us about that as well? I think it'd be interesting to hear your approach.
Yeah, I think it echoes a lot of what Courtney said. If you can stand on this bedrock of non-dilutive funding supporting your lead program, for example, and you're able to keep the cash flow of your venture, low enough, then you can get very far with respect to meaningful milestones, which would be regulatory milestones, manufacturing milestones. So that's really the strategy that I've deployed generally when I've worked on ventures, and Papillon, that's exactly what we're doing, is raising incremental capital to take us to a milestone where the lead program is much more valuable and financeable. So that's the objective.
Great. Tina?
So I think we also took a very similar strategy, and we actually, my initial round on pre-seed was mainly dentists, physicians who really believed in the impact of the product. And so I felt like they would be my early customers, and they were my early customers, and they all saw the challenges in their everyday practice and were looking for that tool. So we raised a couple million just on angels, just who actually became our early customers. The other thing too is I really believe in non-dilutive funding also. A lot of times the partners that we have will put in non-dilutive funding because it just helps you mutually grow that relationship and grow that product. So we do a combination of both. That's our strategy, and it's worked really well for us.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's really great to hear from all of you about, your approaches to non-dilutive funding. As a venture lawyer, you'd think that I might be, kind of pushing the venture capital deals and those types of investments. But I think it is really important early on for founders to think about, how can I get this moving in the right direction without diluting myself and really kind of keeping some of the ownership in the company, for yourselves and all the hard work that you're putting in. So I definitely applaud all of you on that approach. So Courtney, I want to talk a little bit about the funding that you received from Cure Duchenne Ventures, which is a venture arm of Cure Duchenne, a nonprofit patient advocacy organization. What was that process like, and how did building rapport with them factor into this funding round?
Yeah, so again, I think it was really important that we had a prior knowledge and relationship with Cure Duchenne. So again, Cure Duchenne is focused on funding research related to Duchenne that could have could be applied in this disease. And we knew Cure Duchenne from our prior academic research roles, attending conferences, having funded some of academic collaborators. And so having that relationship, I think, is really helpful because the team, they know you, and they know that you're really passionate about working in Duchenne. So we were actually using some of their funding as co-funding for another grant. So we were able to leverage their funding for additional non-dilutive funding, which is really attractive to foundations like this. And we were able to approach Cure Duchenne because our prior relationship, we knew the group there. They understood what we were working on, really trying to develop a novel therapy for Duchenne, which is what their group really wants to fund. And so we're able to have a venture philanthropy investment from Cure Duchenne Ventures as a way to support our work, leverage additional funding, and then continue to build this relationship, which will hopefully continue as the company grows.
That's great. I know this wasn't kind of on our predetermined list of questions, but just kind of in thinking about, working with a patient advocacy organization, have there been any other benefits to working with them aside from the non-dilutive funding?
Yeah, definitely. So, patient advocacy organizations are really well connected into the community. So if you need other introductions in the field, if you need to be introduced to different conferences, different KOLs, those advocacy organizations know all the people in the field. So they're really well connected. There are ways to get your information disseminated and to connect with people and network. And then they also have some information. So some of these advocacy organizations will collect data from patients, and then you could actually leverage some of that information as it's relevant to your company. So they have multiple ways of supporting you beyond the non-dilutive funding, definitely.
Yeah, I always think that's the greatest part of working with some of these patient advocacy groups is just kind of having that cheerleader on your side to help you through what can be a very hard process during the early days of starting out a company. So that's
right, and they really want the same thing you do.
Yeah,
everyone wants to help develop these therapies.
Yeah, exactly. They're looking for a cure as well. So that's great. Tina, I know that you're currently actively fundraising your next financing round, this time from venture capital. How does that compare to fundraising with the ADA, and what's your experience been like so far?
The diligence is a lot heavier. I would say, like I said, when it was angels and in 8 days, like I love the idea, I love the product, I can see where it fits in, it checks all the boxes, and there's so many positive people just pushing me to get to that, to get the funds so that we can get this company all launched off. Now, I mean, I feel like I know financial models really well and projections. We have a very robust data room with every single contract, every single patent and trademark that we have in there. And I feel like the financial model is one of those kind of guessing games. It's an art and a science that you have to get down, and you never know what that VC is particularly looking for. So we're pretty close, knock on wood right now, that we'll be able to finish this up in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think going through that for all the founders out there who haven't gone through diligence yet, I think that first, serious fundraising round is always, it feels very difficult and long and, like repetitive questions and repetitive information, but you get through it. So and come out on the other side with some much needed capital. So okay, so Courtney, similar question to you. You're in the midst of closing your next funding round. How has that process been compared to your other fundraising efforts?
So we're still targeting kind of smaller groups, venture philanthropy, angels, again, trying to raise this round to supplement and use as co-funding for another non-dilutive grant that requires some outside co-funding. So I think it's attractive to those groups where you can say we can raise a small amount of money, but really leverage it to get additional funding. I think right now the environment still feels pretty slow, even for these smaller venture philanthropy and angel groups. But really, I think you can still speak to their passion for wanting to help people, that, you're developing treatments that are aiming to save the lives of patients. And that's, really important for some of these groups. And so even in this environment, you can still tell that story and really appeal to those groups. So I am finding it slow right now, but I do think there's still active interest and some money being deployed. But really trying to target small groups and leverage their funding for additional money is useful.
Right. And next to kind of Carter, I guess this is the same question for you, but also kind of realizing that, all of you are always raising money. It's like a never ending job. You've, close one round and already start on the next, but you've raised some funding from VCs and you're currently raising your next venture round. What has the due diligence process been like there versus a family office?
Well, for Papillon, actually, we're more focused on the incremental capital through early clinical data before raising a venture round, because it's just, that's the type of data you really need, I think, to raise a large round to carry it all the way to commercial for this type of asset. So we've been more focused on, just creative ways to source non-dilutive funding or incremental, capital on a note, for example. So that's what we've been doing here. I have had the experience of helping a company that I co-founded raise an 80 million round with venture, and that gets very complicated. So I think you have to have a very good reason for doing that. I generally prefer this incremental approach and just try to be capital efficient and focus on the asset, the product, and you can build a large company later.
And Carter, how are you finding the current environment for both the incremental funding and non-dilutive funding?
I think that we have a good story with Papillon because there's been, tens of millions in non-dilutive funding that went into the program and has supported it. And so the amount of capital that we need to continue that momentum is not such a high bar, and it's an attractive proposition for a really, like yours in Duchenne, it's a pretty significant unmet need. So, but if I was really right now chasing a lead from venture at this stage when we're about, let's say, a little bit less than a year from an IND filing, I think that would be challenging. So I would rather wait until we're closer.
So I guess this is a question probably for all three of you, but and I touched on this a little bit. You're kind of always you're always out there raising funds, right? And building relationships with potential funding partners. Can each of you talk about how you've managed that and how you've kind of built some of these relationships over time that, maybe these people haven't invested quite yet, they will in the future, they have already, kind of what that looks like for each of you. And Carter, I'll go ahead and have you start first.
I think it's just like anything. You need to raise money, and you sort of make a list of people that you think you should reach out to, and then you end up developing relationships with them, through those pitches or interactions or other conferences. Often you have somebody in common, and so that's, I guess, the best way to have the conversation with them. I'm not sure. I just want to make sure that's what you're asking, Sarah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's just, how do you go about, in my conversations with founders, I think sometimes they, have this great idea and they're really thinking about, okay, can I do this? Can I make the jump from industry or from academia into, my own company and getting out there? And how do I go out and raise the money? How do I talk to investors? How do I build these relationships? So yeah, I think you answered it. It's really about, identifying the ones that you think, you fit their thesis and they might be a good relationship, to have for the company, and then kind of starting to build those relationships. And Courtney or Tina, if either of you have comments on that as well, we'd love to hear those.
Yeah, I definitely agree because like I'll get introductions from other founders or other groups and that I've come across, and I guess we're always technically raising, and we just kind of I keep in touch with a lot of people, and I'll send out investor updates and partnership updates, and that really for some reason generates a lot of like, oh, I'd love to catch up, and so we just keep everything pretty warm.
I think that's really important. And also, the more that you can find groups or people that have interest in your area. So if they've invested in a similar type of company or the same disease, but a different therapeutic option, then they kind of understand the space and the need. You kind of have an initial leg up to start that conversation in some cases. And so I think, if you can meet those people through conferences because you're all there to learn about the same area, that's another way where you could have kind of that initial connection to start a discussion. And I think keeping that warm is really important because, a lot of people will tell you you're too early. And so the more you can actually continue that conversation, I think the better.
Yeah, I agree. I think some of the best advice I've heard is, developing a relationship with someone before you need the money and before you need to ask for money is going to make it a lot easier to ask for that money and ask for that investment when the time comes and you have something for them to invest in. So I think all of you guys had some great advice on that topic. I guess maybe a final question before I do have some Q&A questions that have been coming in, but maybe one kind of final question for all of you. Any final advice you want to give founders on the call about fundraising from sources like family offices, foundations, anything of the like?
I think with these types of groups, it's really important that you show your passion and how your therapy is going to, or your solution is going to be innovative for the topic of interest. So with patient foundations, you need to appeal to the disease that they're working on and why it's going to be revolutionary in that disease. With different angels or family offices, maybe they have a personal connection to a field or came from that field. The more you can kind of appeal and show you're passionate about how your solution is really going to be innovative for this specific area, I think is really important for these connections rather than, if you're talking to VCs, it may be more about how they're going to get an ROI. Hopefully they also still want to help the patients, but with the family offices and foundations, you're really more appealing to their values.
Yeah. Anyone else? Oh yeah, go ahead, Carter.
Okay. I would just say that, the family offices, depending on their size and who the individual or individuals are often the LPs in the VC funds. And so it's a good place to start if you can identify, the family office or the high net individual that would be interested in your approach or your technology. Challenge is that they're not necessarily advertising, whereas the venture funds are easy to find and understand what their portfolio and their thesis is to some extent. So that's where I think there's a challenge in trying to find, the potential suitors and going through the community, like Tina said, for her seed round makes a lot of sense. And the last thing I would say is that unfortunately, for some reason, there's a lot of kind of inbound noise that comes at founders, especially if they're new to it. Groups that promise they'll make lots of introductions for you, and it's pretty noisy. And so it's kind of hard, I think, as somebody who's trying to raise money, it's maybe your first time doing that, to sort through that noise. So that's something that I think, probably you need to just be aware of, is that you need to question, is this group that says they're going to help me with XYZ, or is that really what's going to happen, or is this just some sort of subscription service or something like that, so.
Yes, I think that's great advice. Great advice to be wary of the people that promise all the big investors. So, another question. So on the Q&A, another question that came up is kind of, how do you find these family offices, high-end individuals or nonprofit advocacy groups? Do any of you guys have comments on that piece? No.
I mean, for the nonprofit foundations, if you haven't worked in the disease area before, I would say go to a conference that is often sponsored or hosted by one of these foundations, because they all will kind of attend these kind of key conferences in your disease area. And you can begin to get a sense of who's in the space, what the parent foundations are interested in supporting, and get more of an overview of the space by attending one of the conferences. That would be one suggestion for a specific disease area nonprofits. Those are often hosted by those types of groups.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think it is a little bit harder to find the family offices and high-end individuals, but I think that also comes a little bit with the networking piece and just being out there and talking to people about what you're working on. At least that's what I've seen with some of our clients. So let's see some of these other questions. Can you discuss how to include family offices and high net worth investors on your cap table? Do you use a special purpose vehicle to lump them? That's a good question. I think sometimes venture capital firms are kind of concerned about having a clean cap table and not having too many other investors involved. So have any of you guys seen a special purpose vehicle, or are all of them just kind of listed on your cap table individually?
I'm aware of very successful companies that had great exits in the San Diego area that had a large list of investors on an SPV. So that's obviously a very workable. For me, I haven't had a long enough list of kind of smaller contributors. It's been more people who are writing checks that are sufficient for the for the note or the bridge round. So I haven't used it, but you can be assured that companies that have been successful have used an SPV.
Yeah, and just from my perspective, I think it really depends on the family office or the high net wealth individuals that you're working with. I think they'll also have preferences on kind of how to handle that and what entities they'll use to invest through. So kind of a case by case basis. So Courtney, this one was specific for you. Can you provide some background on the co-funding grant opportunities and how to find them?
Yeah, so there's a couple different grants that have required co-funding that I've come across. One is with CIRM and the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, that if you're a for-profit company, they request 20% co-funding, so outside funding coming in to be eligible to apply for that grant. And the other was an NIH SBIR Phase 2B that requested co-funding. It wasn't a hard requirement to apply for the grant. But there are at least these couple examples where you can then leverage funding from an outside source to then be eligible or to bolster your chances of getting an additional non-dilutive grant funding. So I don't think there's a specific way that I know to specifically look for co-funding grants, but those are a couple examples of ones that I've been involved with.
I'm looking at some of these other questions. So any guidance on alternative funding sources like sovereign funds? Doesn't sound like have any of you guys had experience with sovereign funds or?
That is what I've been asking some of our partners to help with, because those are for the advanced medicines, the cell gene therapies that some of us here are working on. That's a very logical place to go. It's just that if you don't have the right connection to begin with, then that's where you do need some support. So at least in my case, when I'm asking for outreach to a sovereign fund, it's typically through either a venture fund or through a partner, like a large corporate organization that's building out, say, in the Mideast, for example. So that's my suggestion.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they're a little harder to come by on a direct introduction basis. It feels to me like some of our clients that have had success on that front have made connections through other investors. Okay, let's see. Any experiences with equity crowdfunding? I think from my perspective, it kind of goes back to having a nice clean cap table with just a few investors, but have any of you thought about that, gone down that route, decided it wasn't for you, or? No.
Sorry to keep commenting, but when
it's great.
When Kickstarter first launched, at that time I was launching the first venture that I was working on, and I was very interested in that. So I asked them if we could use it to crowdsource, a seed round of a few million. And they thought about it and wrote back and said that wasn't really what they were planning on doing, and so no. But and since then, unfortunately, each time there's a new mechanism for crowdsourcing, like a coin or some other tool, it kind of gets shot down by the SEC. So hopefully now with things like some of the RAGs and other tools that people are using for crowdsourcing in smaller, early investment amounts, that might take off a little bit more, because it would be way more efficient. You can, there are some people I've spoken to who are using a RAG, for example, to raise capital, and the investor can put in anything from $500 to $1 million, so it just opens up the scheme for investment. I just don't know what other problems could arise from that, and I know the lawyers don't like it. So, but it would make sense if more people could participate, especially if it's a consumer tech or something that they could benefit from.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so this is a question a little bit more on the diligence side. How do you find balance between IP protection and R&D to satisfy due diligence requirements from potential investors? So I think this is more maybe not due diligence process related, but kind of deciding on how do we balance spending on IP protection versus the R&D that needs to also happen.
Obviously, I think both are very important, and one of the things with the non-dilutive grant funding is that that will support R&D, but often certain types of grants are not allowed to be spent on IP, and so you may have to be able to balance your different funding sources to have funding that doesn't have restrictions to pay for certain things, while you can really fund a lot of your R&D through non-dilutive grants, which is really the aim of the grant, is to fund the research. So I think it's kind of useful to have multiple sources that you can kind of balance so that you can support both, and it just might be different sources of funding to be able to support both. But it is kind of a strategy that you want to take to balance both protection and longevity of your patents.
Okay, and then I saw another question in here along the lines of Has anyone used AI to kind of find investors? I haven't seen anything like that yet, but to kind of map investors to the type of product, therapy, whatever it is you might be working on.
That's pretty easy, actually. You know, if you just pick any of the tools that are capable of doing any long form research, for example, you can just give it the criteria and the prompts for what you're looking for, and it takes a lot of the drudgery out of trying to chase down who the right funds and so on would be for you to look into. So I think everybody should consider doing that. It's basically just compressing what might take you days into a few minutes.
Yeah. I'm just looking through some of these questions, see if I've missed any. Where to network for digital health, cardiovascular focused family offices? Any insights there? It's kind of a specific question, but.
There's one fund called Broadview that specializes in cardiovascular. So you might start there. Or all of the pharma med device companies generally have a corporate venture group. So you could reach out to that if they're in cardiovascular.
Yeah, and that's one thing we didn't talk too much about are the corporate venture arms. I always find those investments really interesting because they you know, kind of like the patient advocacy groups, they're going to have other resources for you rather than just the funding. They're going to be there to support you on different aspects of the whole process. So great place to look as well. So I'm not seeing any questions we haven't addressed. Oh, I guess here's another one. Carter mentioned it is difficult to sort through the noise of people/companies that are offering to provide access to family offices. How do you suggest sorting through the noise?
I don't know, because I feel like I'm doing it all the time. You'll get people who are claiming they're from a sovereign office, for example, and you know, you might have to look at it and see if it's real. It's probably not. You know, you'll have groups that want you to pay to present or be at a dinner with investors, and that can be very legitimate. It's just hard to know. So I think the simple answer is just don't do any of that and just focus on sort of what, for example, Tina or Courtney said, is just kind of go find people who actually should care about what you're doing, and then a degree removed from them, you might find the family office you're looking for.
Yeah. Well, I think that's it on the Q&A, unless there's any other questions out there. So I just want to say thank you to Courtney, Carter, and Tina for their time today and for having a great conversation with us about some alternative funding sources. And I will hand it back to you, Petra.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah, for being the moderator on today's session. I think we really covered a lot of ground here and provided some fantastic insights. Carter, Courtney, Tina, thank you so much for joining us, sharing your story and your journey and the ups and the downs. I mean, all of you really provided valuable information and relevant advice for startups listening in to keep in mind as they're fundraising. Thank you to everybody who joined us today. I hope you found today's webinar insightful for the companies that you're building. The webinar is recorded and will be made available to everyone. And we hope you'll be able to join us for future sessions about capital insights. And until then, wishing all of you a fantastic day wherever you may be. Thank you so much.
Thank you.